Coming up on Bloom, a ransomware attack disrupting pharmacies and hospitals nationwide could leave you without medical care.
We know of other doctors' offices, people are taking loans, mortgaging their homes just to keep the lights on. So this is quite a bump in healthcare for our country.
And why high-profile parents like Khloe Kardashian are choosing homeschooling. Plus, we'll tell you about the benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace. We'll have all that and more as Bloom, presented by Lifeguard Imaging, starts now. I'm Gayle Guyardo. Welcome to Bloom, presented by Lifeguard Imaging. We all learn in different ways, so today we're exploring how your brain works, and we're kicking things off with our children. Homeschooling is now the fastest growing form of education in the U.S. And you know who's really jumping on board with this idea? The rich and famous, opting out of private school and turning to remote learning opportunities, just like Khloe Kardashian and her daughter True.
My girl has been excelling, huh? We're ready for school. We want to be ahead and confident and fabulous because that's who we are, right, babe?
I love his dad!
Joining me now is a leader in the education industry who works with famous families all over the world as the founder of Novel Education Group, Tiffany Soria. Tiffany, it's great to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this is incredible. I mean, we are seeing so much growth when it comes to homeschooling, especially with the rich and famous.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that you can probably guess that the type of lifestyle that they live is not going to be really conducive. I mean, I guess what you could say is staying in one place for 10 months is not going to fit into their type of lifestyle, right? So they're still, though, looking for really quality education. So we wanted to build something at Novel Education that was going to provide creativity, flexibility, high standards, but also fit in their lifestyle.
And let's talk about just the everyday student, because, you know, you joined us on our podcast, Bloom Health Club, and you said that homeschooling can be free. It's accessible for everyone. And it seems like it fits the theme of our show. We're talking about how we all learn so differently. So if you're the kid sitting in a class with dyslexia or ADHD or anything else where you're on a spectrum, you know, homeschooling could be tailored to your type of learning.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing to note is that a typical school week, if you're in traditional school, is what? Let's say you're in school 6 hours a day. That's 30 hours a week that you are in a building, sort of, that's what your day looks like, probably followed by 1 to 2 hours of homework. In homeschooling, any type of one-on-one instruction, your weekly is about 9 to 15 hours per week. So that's about, 2 to 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. So first of all, that alone tells you how much more efficiently children are learning, or students are learning, whether you are neurodivergent or whether you're an average student or whether you are an advanced student also. And it also tells you how much time you have outside of your learning time to pursue your extracurricular activities, your passions, maybe work on reading or math or other subjects that you are struggling in. It's just so much more efficient in every way. And so for students who do struggle with learning differences or are neurodivergent in some way, this is really such a great way to address that and understand how you learn, understand how your brain works and how you can absorb information.
Yeah, and I love that you talk about finding the passion, because I can speak to myself personally. I was diagnosed as a child with learning disabilities, and it wasn't until I found what really ignited me, what really, I gave me a passion, a fire inside my belly, that learning became exciting. And this is what you do for your students.
Yeah. We've had students that have started with us with really almost zero confidence when it comes to being able to publicly speak, publicly read out loud, be able to write an essay, be able to perform on a test. What it really comes down to is confidence. Being able to see a problem, see an issue, and say, oh, I could do that. I can figure out how to do that. And that's the ultimate lesson, I think, when it comes to school in general. So finding what ignites that is like that first step to really, building that relationship and connecting with students. And then it all kind of comes after that. So students that we've had that have had a really difficult time writing essays. I mean, after a couple years with us, we're seeing them write full essays on their own, do things that they felt they were so incapable of doing in the beginning. Like, I cannot read this book. I cannot write a 5-paragraph essay. And suddenly they're doing it because they had someone there that was able to say, oh, what are you interested in? Why don't we write a few sentences about that? And then that's really what gets them going. And then you kind of just keep going off that wave.
Tiffany, I love your backstory. You started out as an educator yourself in California, and you were driving around all over, which is not easy to do in California, and you kind of fell into this, and you started to work with the clientele of lifestyles of the rich and famous. What are these kids like to work with? Are they bratty? Are they fun? Like, what is it like?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's really, when I was driving around, it was not glamorous. But you go to these people's houses. I mean, it's really amazing, right? Especially you're meeting people that you've watched on TV, you've listened to their music and all this, and it's really fun and it's really exciting. But then you go and you work with them, and you're working with them in a capacity that is very personal to them. You're working with their children, which is like the most precious thing that they have. And so at the end of the day, you realize that despite all of that, everyone sort of wants the same thing. Everyone feels good about the same thing, These kids, yes, I do have to say, they do have resources that are probably more resources than your typical student, for sure. But at the end of the day, they still want confidence. They still want to feel proud of what they're doing, and they still feel good about that, getting the good grade on the spelling test or writing that essay or reading that book that they absolutely loved. That still makes them feel really good. So tapping into that, no matter who they are, is like the key, the important part.
We have a really cool niche in what you do. I mean, we wanted to talk about the growing trends of homeschooling for, all kids, but hearing it from your angle has been fascinating. So Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, appreciate it.
And we're going to share Tiffany's story, and you can also read digital reporter and producer Bertie Waddell's full article on bloomtampabay.com. And we are thrilled. Tiffany joined us on our podcast, The Bloom Health Club, in the WFLA Now Streaming Center to continue this incredible conversation. You can stream the full episode anytime on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. We'll be back with more Bloom right after this. You're watching Bloom, presented by Lifeguard Imaging, saving lives through early detection. Call now 813-582-5222 to schedule your scan today. Welcome back to Bloom. We talk a lot about neurodivergence when it comes to kids, but there are millions of adults out there who have never been properly diagnosed with issues that impact the brain and how they learn. Joining me now with more on neurodiversity and the power of thinking differently is an expert in this space, educator and neurodivergence coach, Sandy Bean. Sandy, it is always such a pleasure to see you.
It's always so fun to be here with you.
So we've had you on Bloom before, but really talking about, St. Pete Girl Boss and how you elevate women across Tampa Bay. But your real passion and what brought you here really is working with people in the neurodivergent space.
Yep, gifted children and people who are twice exceptional. So gifted with disability like ADHD or autism. Those folks are my jam. That's what I did for 20 years before I did what I do now.
And what makes you so brilliant at this is that you don't look at these diagnoses as something that's a problem, whether you kind of shift the narrative into how can we build upon this, because everybody's brain doesn't have to work the same.
No, it doesn't, and we all think differently. So if neurodivergence, by definition, we are all neurodiverse, right? Neurodiversity is something everyone is, but if you're neurodivergent, it simply means that your cognitive function is different than what would be considered typical, which is everyone, right? Giftedness is a neurodivergence, ADHD is considered a neurodivergence. And so what I like to think about is, well, if your brain does work differently, then that means it's going to do things a little bit better in certain ways, and maybe there's aptitudes that aren't going to be, like I can't fix my car, but you know what, I can bake really well. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. So I feel like, though, when we have this lockstep approach to education that happens from the time we're very small, you know, the industrial model of schooling, we are all expected to, you know, check these boxes and go through this process. And so what happens is, if you are neurodivergent, you begin to develop a poor self-concept. And then all of these things kind of snowball. And by the time you're an adult, you have a lot of hurdles to deal with and a lot of things that you're carrying on your back in relation to your neurodiversity, and you don't even know that that's what it's from. So it's an interesting thing to finally get a hold of those people and go, all right, friend, what's going on? And see, you know, what we can do to help them feel better and to help them build their business, because I work primarily with entrepreneurs.
Yeah, you know, at the start of the show, we talked about the growth in homeschooling and how a lot of parents are moving in this direction because maybe their kid doesn't belong in a classroom where you have to check a bunch of different boxes.
Yeah.
And as part of that, you know, the philosophy is to teach kids and young adults at an early age really what is their passion and what can they excel at. Yeah. Now, fast forward, this is what you help adults do with brains that don't work as typical ones, and maybe they can't find their place in the workplace because they're in the wrong field.
There's so many things that could happen. In entrepreneurship, the majority of people would qualify as gifted, and gifted brains have structural differences. 30% or more of entrepreneurs have ADHD, so that fast-working brain where you can really hyper-focus on something you're passionate about can really help a startup just go like crazy, right? But then when you start getting in the day-to-day, your second year, you realize your executive function is poor and you can't remember things, and then that's a lot of times when negative things can happen. In a typical corporate workspace, there are lots of things that can impact someone's performance. It could be maybe a noisy open office. It could be required socializing. It could be communication differences or difficulties. So all these things don't necessarily have to be a hindrance, but if we don't understand them and accommodate for them, they can become a hindrance. And you know, when you go through things as an adult time after time and look at them as failures, I mean, how many times can you get up again before you're like, I'm the problem, you know?
Right.
And it's really not your fault.
So what if you do, well, how do you help somebody like myself who is diagnosed with ADHD? I just, by chance, happen into the most incredible career because I don't have to stay focused on one thing for very long. I can jump from subject to subject to subject or do different things in the office as we prep for the show. But what do you do for the person if they come to you and they're like, hey, I just can't find the outlet where I fit? How do you help them get from point A to point B?
First thing I do is make them find a therapist.
Okay.
Refer them to a therapist.
Right.
I'm like, you need this too. But it really depends. So I ask them because, again, you know, it looks very different depending on the person. The difficult part for most people with ADHD or gifted brains or whatever tends to be their executive function. And those are all of those things that happen inside of your brain that help you manage task initiation, task completion, schedules, you know, that kind of stuff, time blindness. So I ask, okay, well, what seems to be the biggest issue? And they'll usually say something like, well, I have great ideas, but I just can't see them through. Or I have a really hard time getting started. So we pick apart those little things, and then usually the approach is very similar. So one that I get a lot is that I have lots of big ideas, but I don't know where to begin. So what often happens is when you're looking at the big picture, people with ADHD or gifted people or anyone get very overwhelmed. So there's lots of tools where you can break something down into tiny pieces. Creating a routine can be very difficult for neurodivergent people. So we look at, okay, well, what do you already do? How can we use James Clear's, you know, famous habit stacking? How can we stack some habits and create some routines around that so you can start meeting deadlines? There's all kinds of strategies. Body doubling. Somebody can come and just work next to you so that you get work done. So it really depends on their difficulty, but I try to pick something that's either low-hanging fruit that I know we can get addressed right away so they can feel a win and be like, oh, Or I pick something that's high impact that I think they can do. But as soon as they taste a little victory and begin to learn about how their brain works, you can see the thing that makes the biggest difference is self-compassion. They go, oh, yes.
And that's the point you get them to. Sandy, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. And we're going to share Sandy's story on bloomtampabay.com. And when we come back, find out why people with ADHD typically do have more anxiety. But first, it's time for today's Bloom trivia question. How many Americans are neurodivergent? 20, 25, or 30%? We'll have the answer later on Bloom. You're watching Bloom, presented by Lifeguard Imaging, saving lives through early detection. Call now 813-582-5222 to schedule your scan today. We are back talking to experts about the millions of people who are neurodivergent, which simply means their brains work differently. And here's what's interesting. Many adults don't even know they're having issues. Joining me now with more on the giftedness of ADHD is licensed mental health counselor, Dr. Katie Schubert. It's such a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about giftedness in ADHD, because I think a lot of times when we think of, oh, our brains don't work like a typical brain would, you think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case.
No, it's not actually. Our society is really set up to really benefit one kind of brain, but we have so many different kinds of brains, and ADHD specifically can be a really great thing in our society if we accommodate the way that those brains work.
Now, it's interesting because 3 of my daughters were diagnosed with ADHD, and when we went to the neurologist, you know, he said it typically comes from one of the parents, and he quickly pointed to me and said, you know, this is
your
how,
fault.
Yeah, it's your fault. This is how this was handed down. But it is interesting, though, you read that I naturally steered myself in a direction of an industry where 1 minute I'm working on this, and I can quickly switch gears and work on this and work on this. I don't have to go from point A to B in one direct line. I can go all over the place. So people are starting to adapt and find where they fit in. But you're saying now with proper diagnosis and working with kids, young adults, and adults, you can find your path to realize that there's so much potential for your life. You don't have to just happen chance into a career that works for you.
Right. The issue is with traditional schooling, the kids are expected to sit still all day long and then come home and do a full evening of homework, and that's just not conducive to an ADHD brain. ADHD brains like a lot of stimulation. They like going from one thing to another very quickly. They like to be hyper-focused on the things that they enjoy. So, I mean, it's really important to know what your brain needs and feed it that thing.
So in a world, as you eloquently put it, lends itself to a typical brain, a typical way of learning, how do people with ADHD and other learning difficulties fit in? I mean, what needs to be done?
I think an understanding of how the ADHD brain works is really important. Knowing that ADHD brains get very overstimulated very quickly, and knowing how to calm the brain down once it does get overstimulated, knowing what kinds of inputs the ADHD brain needs to thrive. All of those things are really important. But the really great thing right now is that there has been so much education on how the ADHD brain works. So teachers are more equipped to handle it, parents are more equipped to handle it, people with ADHD are more equipped to handle it.
So talk to me about ways that we can cope with a loud and needy brain. I love that you call it a needy brain, because it is a needy brain.
It is a needy brain. I think that understanding how many things we have on our plate at once is really important. So when it comes to processing information, it seems like anywhere from 3 to 5 things on our stage, on our plate at once is the best amount to have. What happens with ADHD brains is that sometimes we have more than 5 things. You're at home with your 3 kids, you have a lot of stimulation all at once, and then you start getting overstimulated and frustrated and maybe angry with your kids and have an outburst. Or you're not able to help them regulate their emotions because you're so in your own emotions. So it's important to know how much stimulation you have coming in so that you can regulate yourself and then, be a good parent or be good at the work that you do.
What about, there's something that you also talk about, and it doesn't really fit into the theme of the show, but I wanted to ask you about it anyways. As adults get older, you've been tackling the subject of ADHD and sex. I didn't even know there was a correlation.
There is. Yeah, so I'm specifically a sex therapist, but I do see a lot of ADHD in my office. People with ADHD do have a hard time having sex because it's difficult to get their brains calm enough to enjoy sex or intimacy with their partner. So using a lot of mindfulness exercises, being in your body and not in your brain, learning how to turn your brain off, learning how to turn your thoughts off is really beneficial when you're being intimate of any kind with your partner.
So how do you teach people to calm the busy brain and the needy brain?
That's a hard question. It depends on, so ADHD individuals are so unique. So it's really important to find the thing that they need. It could be exercise, it could be art, anything that they can hyper focus on and get their energy out. So you have to get to know your brain and understand what you need to give it for it to calm down. Some people do really well with meditation. Other people need to tire their bodies out with exercise. Some people need to hyper focus on arts or being creative of some sort. But being able to give your brain a space to be calm lends itself to being calm at home with your partner, with your kids, anywhere.
Well, it is such a pleasure to talk to you. We really appreciate you shining some light on the ADHD brain. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And we're going to share Dr. Schubert's story on BloomTampaBay.com. And when we come back, meet a woman working to find neurodivergent adults jobs.
And really, it was a huge gift to me because I got to understand their world, and what they were experiencing. It helped me so much with my own daughter.
Welcome back to Bloom. Millions of Americans in this country are neurodivergent, meaning their brains work differently. Many times this doesn't greatly impact their lives, but for others it does. Joining me now is the founder of NeuroShifts, who's been working tirelessly for years to create a more diverse and inclusive world. Vicki Wester, welcome to Bloom. It is such a pleasure to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to see you again.
Likewise. Now, when we were putting this show together as a team, I'm like, I know the perfect person that we need to reach out to because you've been doing this for so many years, and it was born out of necessity. But I remember meeting you when you were opening a cafe and giving young adults on the spectrum that didn't learn the same new opportunities.
Totally, yes, and it all stems from a personal journey, my personal journey with autism through our daughter Gabby, who was diagnosed at the age of 4. And we had a really tough time, like many families today. We had a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. Before we even knew what it was, we didn't know how to best support her. And then over time, just, people with neurodiversity, they think differently. They process information differently. They see the world differently. So having a child like that, if you don't understand what it is and what they're experiencing, can be really challenging. So that is the reason why I left my corporate job, and I got the beautiful experience of starting a cafe that provided training and employment for young adults. It was called Artistas Cafe, and really it was a huge gift to me because I got to understand their world, and what they were experiencing. It helped me so much with my own daughter, and then it really helped me to know how to create a safe and supportive environment where they could thrive.
And Vicki, I know along the way, in addition to the cafe, you started a lot of B2B relationships, of introducing different big corporations to those who, are neurodiverse and right. Creating relationships. And now you've shifted into something, the Green Zone life. So tell me about what you've been doing.
Yes. Well, the Green Zone, it's been a part of our journey for a long time because our family lived in the red zone, okay? And red zone is where you're experiencing emotions like worry and frustration and anger and fear, just a lot of things that sometimes come with the diagnosis. And I was living in that place for way too long. And I was like, you can't sustain it. It's just not a good place to be. And so my journey became, how do I get into a good feeling place, most connected with who I am, right? And experiencing green zone emotions like hope and positive expectation for our future and for Gabby's future and joy and fun and all the things we all want. And so really, as it became our journey and we were able to see the shift in our own family from red zone to green zone, we realized, hey, with green zone, so many things can happen in our world, right? We can create empowered and equipped families that can go out and help advocate, because there's so much advocacy needed in so many different areas of our community right now. But if we're not in a good feeling place about our child, their diagnosis, we're having trouble dealing with the day-to-day challenges that come up, it's really hard for us, to support ourselves as moms, particularly, our child, and then, our community.
So tell us a little bit about what you've brought and how you help people get into the green zone.
Yes. So really, it's people want to feel good, right? But they don't know how. Like, okay, what do I do? And so, so in this emotional chart, you can see there's red, yellow, green. And our tools, what you see here, this is our green zone box. It's really equipped with 7 tools, and we have 8 modules in the training to really help us to understand how we can shift ourselves from here to here. So it's never external. People can't shift us. We have to shift ourselves. So really, it's understanding some of these tools like, focus wheel. What are we focusing on in our life? What do we want to create? Shifting from limiting beliefs and thoughts to creating new and positive, empowering beliefs for our lives. Being in the present moment, mindfulness, meditation. So there's, these are proven tools, but we put them in a way that people can learn them, they can use them. And
they're practical.
They're practical.
I love it. Vicki, it has been such a pleasure seeing you. I hope you come back. It's been far too long, and I know you have a lot of knowledge to share with folks in the community, so we appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And if anybody wants a green zone chart, just go to our website, neuro-shifts.org. We'll give you a free emotional chart for yourself.
Right. I love it. Okay, and we'll make that easy for you. We're going to put everything you need to know on bloomtampabay.com. And when we come back, we're exploring the benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace. Don't go away. You're watching Bloom, presented by Lifeguard Imaging. We begin where your checkup ends. Call now, 813-582-5222 to schedule your scan today. Welcome back to Bloom. April is Autism Acceptance Month, and this year's theme is Celebrate Differences. Joining me now to talk about neurodiversity in the workplace is clinical psychologist Dr. Aggie Papazian. Welcome to Bloom, Dr. Papazian.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Aggie, talk to me a little bit about the importance of understanding neurodiversity and the autism spectrum.
Absolutely. So neurodiversity is basically a spectrum of neurological differences. So that includes autism, that includes ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, any really neurodevelopmental difficulties are considered neurodiversity.
So back in the day, it was almost like, one group was put here and then the other group was put here, but we really need to learn to blend these worlds as a society.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think as we become more educated as a public about neurodiversity and the positive experiences that we can have with neurodiverse individuals, we're able to not only be aware that these differences can add and shed more light and happiness to our life, and it could be more productive, but we can also get a better understanding of how we can help each other.
Yeah, because there are benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace.
100% there are. So individuals who are autistic, oftentimes they have hyper-focused areas of interest. So what that means is if they're really into something, they are going to be super focused into that. They're going to, stay longer to finish that task, be more dedicated than maybe a neurotypical person would be to complete that task. And they'll oftentimes think outside of the box and think of ways that, you know, neurotypical individuals wouldn't think of in terms of problem solving and figuring out how to achieve the goals that they need to achieve.
So what are some of the challenges that you see today that people who are neurodiverse face in the work environment?
So I think the challenges start from early on, from number one, with the interview process, right? So when you are conducting an interview with a person, you oftentimes, for a neurotypical individual, you expect the individual to come in, to make appropriate eye contact, but this is a difficulty that some autistic people have. It's difficult for them to make eye contact sometimes. And so if you're going on an interview and you're autistic and you don't make eye contact, even though you might be even overqualified for the position, your employer might think you're being disrespectful or rude or not interested. So I think it starts even before we get into the job. And then once we start the job, I think it's just as important to educate the people that we work with. So letting them know that, hey, if you say hi to Billy and Billy doesn't respond hello, it's not because he's not being a team player or trying to collaborate with you. It's that maybe he didn't pick up on that social cue, and teaching the other people in the workforce of how can we connect with them. Another thing is, oftentimes I see individuals who are autistic, they don't want to see themselves on camera sometimes. So sometimes that can be difficult. So during Zoom meetings, they might turn off the camera, and then you'll hear their boss say, well, you have to turn on your camera, it's rude, camera on policy. That can be really distracting for some autistic people, and it could really throw them off their game of what they're trying to talk about and achieve. So just being aware of those things, as well as creating an environment that's sensory friendly for the individual. So for example, if they're in a meeting and the meeting is too loud, or if the lights are too bright, that they have the opportunity to go in a room that they can go into that's less stimulating for them, so that they could, in a way, recharge and then come back.
Are you starting to see more workplaces creating inclusive work environments?
Honestly, I'm starting to see some of that, but not enough. So we need to see more of that. We need to educate our employers, our employees, more about autism and more about neurodiversity in general. And this needs to be, in my opinion, a mandatory part of the training process.
All right, Dr. Aggie, I can't thank you enough for joining us on Bloom to share this with our viewers.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and we're going to put this story on bloomtampabay.com, and stick around to find out how a Russian hack is impacting your health care. Bloom will be right back. A major cyber attack continues to cripple the healthcare industry. United Health Group accused a notorious ransomware gang known as Black Cat, or Alpha V, of hacking healthcare payment systems across the country. Here to explain the implications when it comes to your healthcare are Docs Outside the Box and Kids Outside the Box, Doctors Lana Gardner and Leah Teakle-Taylor. Doctors, welcome to Bloom. It's great to see you both again.
Yeah. Hi, Gayle.
So, doctors, this is a really big deal, and quite frankly, I'm surprised we're not hearing more about it. Can you talk to us about what's going on and how it's impacting doctors like yours who run smaller clinics but still take care of so many patients?
Absolutely. You want to start?
Yeah, it's a big deal, Gayle. A clearinghouse is a middleman between doctors' offices and hospitals and other aspects of the healthcare industry with the insurance companies. And as of February the 21st, which, as you know, is over 6 weeks ago now, all of a sudden, this major clearinghouse that handles over half the doctors and half the hospitals in our country went dark. So you're not able to send claims to your insurance company, although the insurance companies are still collecting premiums from their patients. They're not paying out because they can't get any idea of what's happened in the medical practices and in the hospitals.
Now, for smaller offices, this means that doctors, nurses, people are missing payrolls. Fortunately for Docs Outside the Box and Kids Outside the Box, you guys have been able to sustain and keep everything going and not really have your patients feel any impact at all.
Correct. At first, it took us a few weeks to figure out what to do. And just a blessing of our clinic is that we have a second electronic medical record where we house old files. And because of that, their clearinghouse was a different clearinghouse. So over the course of the last 2 weeks, we took 1,200 claims and moved them from our new EMR that doesn't essentially work anymore to the old one. We are just starting to see payment come through.
That's a relief, because people got to keep the lights on, they have bills to pay, and we, especially our medical care professionals like yourself who do so much for us day in and day out. But I also understand this had started to impact patients when it came to prescriptions, and it wasn't just for the healthcare industry on a B2B basis. The everyday Joe was starting to feel this.
Absolutely. This clearinghouse performs hundreds of functions for doctors' offices. Ours just happens to be the narrow function of communication with the insurance companies. Patients aren't able to get their prescriptions. They're not able to get procedures authorized because the office can't communicate with their insurance company. And what's worse is eventually they're going to get bigger bills than they thought they were going to get, because for several months now, there have been no processing of their healthcare claims. And then all of a sudden it will come home to roost whenever Change Healthcare gets its facilities back. This will be some patient disgruntlement across the board over the next few months.
What's the bigger picture? I mean, you hear about things like this, and even though I don't think this is being super widely talked about on mainstream media, it does make you kind of press pause and have concern at the fact that this could even happen to such a huge clearinghouse, and it's been going on for weeks on end.
Weeks on end. One of the things we may see in the future are doctors' offices that don't take insurance anymore. There's quite a risk, because we're sitting here, if we didn't have the second EMR, we started going through our savings, which thank God we were smart enough to have, but we know of other doctors' offices, people are taking loans, mortgaging their homes just to keep the lights on. So this is quite a bump in healthcare for our country.
It is, and you say for the bigger institutions and hospitals, it's easier for them to absorb, but if you do go to a doctor, like I know you have a very personal relationship with each and every one of your patients, for other, places that don't, didn't have the things, their ducks in a row like you guys do, that too will hurt the patient.
Absolutely. You can't, it's almost like the beginning of COVID, Gayle, when you kind of go, do I furlough these people, or what do I do when there's, what business can sustain itself for long term, months on end without the bulk of their income? It just doesn't happen. So you'll see practices downsizing, but the patient's needs are still there. It's just that how do you provide care and coverage with manpower when you can't make payroll every 2 weeks?
Well, doctors, we're really grateful here at Bloom that you're okay and that you're surviving it. I hope the end is in sight and things start going business as usual again, but we certainly want to thank the both of you for bringing our viewers up to speed as to what's going on.
Oh, great question.
Thanks, Gayle.
All right, take care. And of course, we're going to post this story on BloomTampaBay.com. We'll be back with more Bloom right after this. Welcome back to Bloom. The impact grandparents can have on our life is profound, and our next guest wanted to pay tribute to her late grandmother's legacy through a children's book, H is for Weya. Joining me now is author Madison McAllister. Madison, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you, Gayle. Thanks for having me.
I know this was a passion project for you, and like with me, my grandmothers were everything to me, and you had a special relationship with yours. So tell me what motivated you to write the book.
Yeah, sure. Like you mentioned, it was a passion project for sure. My grandmother was very special, like a second mom to me, and I know grandmothers play a very big part in most people's lives, and my grandmother was definitely a person for me that did. So I decided after she passed that I'd turn something sad into something positive and share her light with the world and hopefully inspire others as well.
Made this a very interactive book. It's a book that a parent can read to their child. Then the child can take the book and make it their own. You have like little workshop pages in there where you can go through mazes. And so the design of it is very special as well.
Yes, definitely. It took a little bit to get the illustrations correct, but we used Amazon ebook publishers and to go back to the drawing board several times to get her face right and get the illustrations meaningful and correct. And it was a fun project for sure for us.
And grandparents are, we're talking a lot about the ways we learn. And one way we learn is through our family legacies. And it is important to remember that, what your grandmother taught you, what your mom is now teaching your children. Yes, for sure. And it goes down in history. So if your grandmother were alive today, what do you think she would think about this book?
Oh, she would melt for sure. She actually published a book as well for my brother and I, but it took her a lifetime to get to that point. So I think she would be very proud and actually realize how much I did love her. And I'm sure she knows. So.
She knows for sure. So talk to me a little bit about the book, because you kind of say, they're not your mom, they're not your sister, they're not your mister. They do have a unique space in our world.
Yes. So it's really just goes on to talk about, what Awea is as well, which was the name she got because I couldn't say abuela in Spanish. So we tied in the Spanish and the English and talked about how Awea is a fingerprint and how grandmother leaves a very big imprint on your life. So yeah, I think it's a little educational as well, and it's really about the mark she left behind.
And that is important, and it is important for parents out there to let their kids spend time with the grandparent, because there's so much you can learn from that next generation.
Totally. It's all about, that we're all going to get our turn if we're lucky enough, and just seeing it through, again, my mom's now, she's the grandmother, so, and I hopefully will be one day too, so it's definitely a special thing, and yeah, grandmothers are just special.
They are very, very special. Well, you are special, and we appreciate you rolling out your new book. Congratulations on it.
Thanks.
And for all of you out there who love your abuela, your nene, your grandma, whatever you want to call it, Hechas por Abuela is now available. We'll tell you where you can find the book on bloomtampabay.com. We'll be back with more Bloom right after this. It's time for today's Bloom Trivia question. How many Americans are neurodivergent? 20, 25, or 30%? The answer is 20%. This means 1 in 5 people have a brain that works differently from the neurotypical majority. Some common neurodivergent conditions include autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. Well, we hope you'll tune in again on the next Bloom presented by Lifeguard Imaging. The Today Show's Joy Bauer is joining us with more mouth-watering recipes in this week's What the Health. And find out how to immediately diminish stress in your life with emotional healer and meditation experts to the stars.
Theta is where you can actually be like a child again. And when you're a childlike energy, you're like a sponge. So you can absorb the information that I'm sharing with you with my voice, a specific frequency that allows you to feel safe.
Stay healthy, everyone, and I will see you on the next Bloom. Call now 813-582-5222 to schedule your scan today.